Thank you guys for coming to our July webinar. As a reminder, I'm Ashley. I'm the Executive Director of the Firearms Research Center. And today we have a little bit of a different presentation. I know we do a lot of kind of legal scholarship, but today we're going to talk more about material culture and archaeological research. And we're joined by a good friend of mine, Joel Bohy, who is the owner of J. Bohy Historical Consulting. He's a historical arms specialist at Blackstone Valley Auctions and a frequent appraiser on PBS's Antiques Roadshow. And most recently, he is the co-author of Bullet Strikes from the First Day of the American Revolution, which you will be hearing a little bit about today. So Joel, I will let you take it away. For those of you who aren't normally on Zoom webinars, just as a reminder, the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen is where you can type in questions, and we will answer them towards the end of the presentation. All right, take it away, Joel.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our work, which we published in Bullet Strikes on the First Day of the American Revolution. But in order to get to that point, I think it's important to talk about the fact that we're using multidisciplinary techniques to look at history. So we're using archaeology, experimental archaeology, material culture study, documentary evidence, and also modern forensic techniques. So in order to understand the bullet strikes, we also have to understand a little bit of the ballistics of the guns and the types of guns that are being used. And of course, I'm not advancing.
We've been having some technical difficulties, but it was advancing. So Joel, if you want to take a look, and if not, I'll share my screen and you can just.
Why don't we, so we don't have any snags, share your screen, and then I'll just say next slide.
All right, sounds good. Well, hopefully that works now. So give us 1 second, guys. Joel, if you'll stop sharing yours, please.
Sure.
All right. Are you able to see it, Joel?
Yep.
All righty. I should be able to advance. Well, now I'm not going to be able to advance. All right. I don't know why. Now I'm having technical difficulties. There we go.
Oh, there it is.
Now if I can only go back. There we go. All right.
All right. We ready to go?
Sure.
All right. You can go to the next slide right there. So I grew up in Concord, Mass, on the edge of the battlefield, and became very interested in the study of April 19th, the outbreak of the war, as well as material culture, studying the arms that were used. And next slide. And I was on the advisory committee for the Parker's Revenge Archaeology Project in 2013. And I got to meet archaeologist Dr. Doug Scott, who's in the black jacket. And while we were working on the project, we talked about using experimental archaeology, firing at different objects, targets, metal detecting each ball, and studying the marks on the balls, which would help us when we're doing the archaeological work that we were doing. Next slide. And that enabled us to put together next slide, and the next one, major studies where we've put all of our research and all the ballistics work into these free studies that are available for anybody to research. And that also enabled us to put together some great high speed and high resolution videos. Next slide.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, nothing seems to be working right today.
There we go.
Okay, and then hit play. Just hit the next button. And this is one of them. And this shows how the lock functions, because that's important. You can see the flint. Oh, what happened? Stop.
There we go.
Oh, there it is. The flint striking what's called the hammer during the period, sending a shower of sparks into the pan, which is filled with gunpowder. And the gunpowder will ignite, and that will send that flame through the vent on the side of the barrel and into the charge. But this is a great video to kind of show, this is something when you're shooting the gun, it happens in a split second. So you don't realize how much spark and flame there actually is. But This is just the powder in the pan going off. And then in a second, the charge will go off right here. And then you can see the flame shooting out of the vent. So that's how the lock functions externally. But we also have to look at the internal ballistics of the gun a little bit. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, there we go. So windage is really important. It's something people don't think about in 18th century smoothbore arms. And windage is the difference between the diameter of the bore and the diameter of the ball. So in the 18th century with smoothbore guns, they weren't putting a ball down the barrel that was the exact same size as the bore. The balls were smaller because with black powder, as you shoot the gun, you get fouling buildup and the ball can jam down the bore. Next slide. British manuals talked about it. This particular one is 1779. The diameter of the musket bullets differs but 1/50th part of that of the musket bore. For if the shot but just rolls into the barrel, it is sufficient. So there they're talking about it just being able to roll down the barrel. Next slide. And this one is from a memorandum from the Massachusetts Army in May of 1775. And amongst other gun-related notes, it says that each soldier have such cartridges that will slide down without drawing the rammer. So that's a pretty loose ball with a paper cartridge to be able to go from the muzzle all the way to the breech of the gun without ramming it down. Next slide. British Major J. Clark Kennedy in 1855 wrote about smoothbore ballistics. This is a few years after the British had adopted the model, the pattern 1853 Enfield rifled musket. And he wrote, a musket loaded with a round ball, which by its own weight would rest upon the bottom of the bore. When the piece was held at the present, and being smaller than the bore, there would be windage or a certain space left above the ball. And he went on to say in the next slide, gunpowder, when fired, acts with equal power in all directions, and when confined, as in the barrel of a musket, forces its way wherever there is the least opposition offered. In this case, therefore, a portion of the force of the charge escapes by the open space above the ball, whilst the force of the remainder of the charge drives the ball onwards. The greater the windage, the greater is the escape and waste of the force of the charge. Matter serious enough in itself, but only a part of the evil effects of windage. For gunpowder, acting equally in all directions, presses the ball violently downwards as it escapes through the space above, and the ball, driven forwards by a part of the charge and downwards by the other part, would strike the bottom of the bore. And then he goes off the rails a little bit here. Says, from whence, following nearly that same law by which a ball would bound off when thrown against the wall, the bullet would pass along the bore, bounding and rebounding. Can you move on to the next slide, please? And this is his diagram of what happened inside the bore. Obviously, he's compressed the barrel a little bit, but that's not exactly what happens. And we've tested this in our studies. Next slide. So if you look at the top illustration, you see a paper cartridge seated on top of the powder charge. And in the windage area above the ball, you can see it's got a little bit of paper, which would help hold the ball in place. But on the diagram on the bottom, you can see the charge going off and the gases escaping over the ball. You can see the gases pushing the ball forward. And then at the bottom, you can see an arrow there. The ball can sometimes scrape all the way along the barrel on the way out of the gun. Now, sometimes it can also only scrape for a little while, and you can see that based upon markings left on the musket ball. Next slide. And then you can click again. So this is a fouling piece, a provincial fouling piece, and you can see the gases that are coming out. The ball hasn't even left the muzzle yet. That's the waste of gases or the evil effects of windage. And there's the ball coming out of the muzzle. Now, this was a 0.60 inch bore with a 0.55 inch ball and a paper cartridge. So you can see a little bit of the paper coming by that left with the gases, and then the ball, and then what paper didn't burn off going by also. Next slide. So I was lucky enough to work on a project with the National Park Service at the North Bridge in Concord. And on the east side of the bridge, we found 5 fired provincial balls that had been fired from the west side of the bridge. And you can see on this ball in my hand the effects of the windage, which is called partial compression banding, and it leaves that flat mark along the ball when it rides the bore. Now, this particular ball reached its terminal velocity without hitting anything, so it just dropped in the soft ground for us to find it 246 years later. Next slide. And here's one from one of our live fire studies. This particular ball hit a dirt berm, and you can see that, but you can also see the partial compression banding. And on top of the ball, this was a buckshot load, a buck and ball load. So you can see the dimpling on the top of the ball from the buckshot. Next slide. So in order to also understand the bullet strikes, you need to understand the guns that were being used by both sides. So the British, other than officers who carried a fusil or a sergeant who would carry a carbine, the two main guns that were being carried on April 19th were the British pattern 1769 shortland musket with a barrel length of 42 inches and the British pattern 1756 longland musket with a barrel length of 46 inches. So other than some minor cosmetics, the length of the butt plate tang, some other little minor things, these guns are fairly identical. And next slide. But their bores are not all identical. So we've done a survey of almost 90 original guns in really good condition. And you hear a lot of reenactors who will tell you that the bore size on British muskets is all 0.75 inch, and it's not. They range from 0.75 to 0.82. And that may not sound like much, but it is when you're talking about the ballistics of the gun. Next slide. So British musket balls. Now, we just talked about the size of the bore. The balls, again, are going to be smaller. So government allows 11 bullets in the pound for the proof of muskets and 14, and you can click the next button. 14 in the pound or 29 in 2 pounds for service, which comes up to 0.693. Now, obviously, they're not all 0.693. Next slide. We've done a lot of ball studies from sites like this at Fort Ticonderoga, where we go through all of the musket balls in their collection, as well as all of ours done archaeologically or found archaeologically. Next slide. Ball sizes found archaeologically range from 0.67 to 0.72 with an average of 0.68. The musket ball on the right, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute, that's an April 19th fired British ball found in the rafter of the Merritt Monroe House. And it's about a 70 caliber using the Civilich formula, which is taking the weight to figure the caliber. Next slide. Provincial guns are all over the place. They are using all different types of guns. One of the more common is the fowling piece used for hunting. And this particular gun was carried by Robert Chaffin of Acton, Massachusetts on April 19th. And it is adapted for a bayonet. So he could use it for hunting or his militia service. Next slide. Here are 3 more examples of provincial arms. The top one, a fowling piece carried by Framingham Minuteman Corporal Roger Brown. That gun was badly converted to percussion in the 19th century and then badly converted back to flint, but its bones are original to April 19th. The middle gun is the fowling piece carried by Lexington Militia Captain John Parker. That gun was also converted to percussion and reconverted back, and the barrel was shortened. And the bottom gun is an early 1720s-ish French hunting gun, and that's all original except that the barrel was shortened a little bit in the 19th century. Next slide. So the British also commented on the guns that were being used by provincials, and an unknown British soldier on April 19th wrote, "These fellows were generally good marksmen, and many of them used long guns made for duck shooting." Lieutenant John Clark of the British Marines wrote after Bunker Hill, "Their firelocks are very long, some near 7 feet." So those are both fowling pieces. Next slide. They also use guns assembled from older parts. Collectors call Frankenstein guns or Massachusetts parts guns. And this example was carried by John Gordon of Stowe, Massachusetts, who marched on April 19th, and he was mortally wounded at the Battle of Bunker Hill. This gun uses an earlier French lock, trigger guard, side plate. The barrel is probably from a fowling piece. It's a small bore for the period, and it's got a New England maple stock. Next slide. They also used older French arms, and here's an example from the newspapers. lost in the battle at Menotomy by Nathan Putnam of Captain Hutchinson's company, who was then badly wounded. He was shot in the right shoulder. A French firelock marked D number 6 with a marking iron on the breech said Putnam carried it to a crossroads near a mill. Whoever has said gun in possession is desired to return it to Colonel Mansfield of Lynn or to the selectmen of Danvers, and they shall be well rewarded for their trouble. So the gun they're talking about there is probably an older French model 1728. Sometimes some of them are adapted in 1746, but very similar to the image shown. Next slide. And we know that he never got paid for that gun, or he never got his gun back by this receipt, which isn't going all the way to the top of the slide, that he put in for being wounded. He wanted to get some money out of it, and the loss of his firelock. Next slide. And on February 10th, 1776, he was actually paid 10 pounds and 12 shillings for his nursing, boarding, doctoring, loss of time, and for his gun. Next slide. One of the biggest misnomers of April 19th is both sides carried the same guns, and that's just not true. There were some older King's arms that were in Massachusetts when the war broke out. Those had been shipped over in late 1755. There were 2,000 British pattern 1742 muskets. Those would have been part of the provincial stock, so they would be issued to soldiers who would use them and then return them. However, from the gun lists I've gone through, there were some that vanished. That never made it back to stores. So some of those guns could have been used on the 19th. Next slide. And this is a great document I found at the Massachusetts State Archives. And it's dated in June 1775, around the time of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And it's the number of bullets to a pound each gun carries in Captain Turner's company. If you look on the left of the document, you see 12 ball per pound, which would be about a 73 caliber ball. And then the 14 ball per pound, which would be around a nominal 6.9. But as you get to the middle of that document, the 20, 22, 26, those are all smaller balls that would be consistent with being in a fowling piece. Next slide. So a research trip to the Arlington Historical Society, which is in the Jason Russell House in Arlington, Mass. I went there to look at some objects in their collection, and I had gone there to look at all the bullet holes that survived from the 19th. And as I was walking around, I started to notice more bullet holes that people hadn't noticed before. And we'd look at where a ball went and then where it had to go after it hit something. And we started to find more than anticipated. And at that point, I called my colleague, Dr. Scott, and we decided we were going to turn this into a project. And we were going to look at all of the known bullet structures, architectural elements, and objects that survived. Next slide. And doing that, we were going to use modern forensic techniques, shooting incident reconstruction, but we adapted it to a historical context. So we're using these modern forensic techniques like ballistics rods and lasers, lead testing, and obviously there are some of the things that modern forensics folks use that we didn't need to use in our studies. Next slide. So I put them in chronological order. That's not the way we studied them. But the first shot that we have was fired as the British light infantry retreated from the North Bridge in Concord. Next slide. And hit the arrow again. And up a little higher from where the arrow, for some reason they're stopping. There's a bullet strike. And if you hit the next slide, Ashley, you can see it better here. Margaret Thornton in 1934. She came to look at this musket ball hole, and I grew up right down the street from this house. So as a kid in elementary school, I used to go play in there and point at the musket ball hole too, and think about how cool it would be to study it. Next slide. And here it is today. There's a piece of plexiglass over it, but it measures about 0.71, so it's consistent with being fired from a British musket. Next slide. You can see where it came through. The post or the stud that you see on the left wasn't there. That was added in 1865. But you can see the hole and you can see the wood blowout on the sheathing. Next slide. This one's a little bit easier where the white arrow is. You can see that feather edge sheathing. And then on the right, where the two yellow arrows are, you can see where the wood blew out. And so we took 18th century original materials, and we had them built into house sections so that we could shoot them. Next slide. And you can hit the button again. And here we have a ball going through this section of house through the clapboard and sheathing. And you can hit the next button. And you can see where it came through on the other side. There's one hole above it where the scale is, typical wood blow up, but the bottom one we hit near the feather edge sheathing, but there was a knot there and the wood was a little bit harder, so it took out a little more wood than the Elisha Jones house. But as the British retreated past this house, they went back down into Concord Center. They finished their destruction of some of the warlike stores that were in town, in and around town, and they retreated around noon. And about a mile outside of town at Merriam's Corner, where I grew up, they were attacked from all sides, which began the running battle back to Boston. And next slide. As the British made it to Fisk Hill, there was a house there owned by Ebenezer Fisk. And James Hayward of Acton, a 25-year-old school teacher, had stopped at the well to get a drink of water. And he ran into a British soldier that was looting the house who came out. And purportedly, they both fired at each other. And there's some 19th century accounts where they had a conversation and all these things. We don't know what happened because they were the only two that were there. But the first mention of it is in the newspapers. Mr. James Howard and one of the regulars discharged their pieces at the same instant, and each killed the other. But Rebecca Fisk, who was the daughter-in-law of Ebenezer Fisk, and she lived in the house, she had taken her father-in-law away from the house to safety. And after the fighting had passed, she came back and she found the dead British soldier on a front step. She found two wounded British soldiers in the house, and the third was a young American employing his dying breath in prayer. A bullet had passed through his body, taking off in its course the lower part of his powder horn. The name of this youthful patriot was J. Hayward of Acton. His father came and carried his body home. It now lies in Acton Graveyard. And in the 80s and 90s, we had known this portrait of Rebecca Fisk existed, but all there was a bad picture from an auction catalog in black and white. And it's a wonderful painting of her. And one of the great things about it is it's actually a picture within a picture. Next slide. And up in the corner is an allegorical view of that event with James Hayward and the British soldiers shooting at each other. Next slide. And here is his powder horn that was brought back with his body by his father. His brother, Stevens Hayward, ended up with a horn, and then his son, Stevens Hayward, ended up with a horn. And he added the plug that's in there now with the silver band and the scutcheon around it. But you can see where the bullet went in, fairly round, and then blew out the other side. That would have been a horrific wound. So we decided to test that. Next slide. And here you see a ballistics gelatin block being struck with a bullet. You can see that we put cloth in front of it to emulate a coat, waistcoat, and shirt. Look at that ballistics gelatin jump. Next slide. And here, at the end of the day, we took that block back to the house and hit the next button. And we cut it open. And this is what came out. You can see where the ball split in this case. We don't know if that happened to Hayward, but you can see all of the fragments and bits of cloth that went inside that ballistics gelatin. So that was a horrific wound that he received on the afternoon of April 19th. Next slide. The British then retreated down into Lexington Center. And here you can see in this Amos Doolittle Plate 1 engraving, this detail of the Merritt Monroe House with the British marching in front of it to Concord. But on the way back, the British passed it again. Hit the next button, please. And this is the Merritt Monroe House today. And can you hit the button again? And a shot was fired from the backyard. Now you can see that it's had numerous additions to it. But a shot came through a back window, went through the floor, and lodged in the central rafter in the attic. Next slide. And click it again, please. And there is where the ball lodged in this rafter. You can see a little upside down V above it. So at some point, the ball that struck it was dug out. Next button. And here's the ball. It's at the Lexington Historical Society. It's the one I showed a little earlier, but you can see where it had been pried out of that rafter, and you can see the wood still embedded in the ball itself. Next slide. So part of our searches involved newspapers. You can hit it again. And this is one that I found from 1915. Inside, the workmen found two bullet holes, one on the right of the front door and the other in the roof. In the latter case, the bullet was traced to where it had embedded itself in a heavy timber. Apparently, both shots were fired at the Battle of Lexington. Bullet holes had been found in the Buckram Tavern or Buckman Tavern across the street on the other side of the battle green, but it was not until yesterday that it was known that the Monroe house had been hit. Next slide. And here's Buckman Tavern across the street. From about where I took this picture, a British soldier fired a shot at the front door. Next slide. And you can see the ballistics rod stuck in the door. The door is on display inside of Buckman Tavern now. Hit next, please. And here's the entrance. And then hit next again. And there's the exit. And you can see the wood blowout. And you can see that it was probably just filled with plaster after the event. And they just filled the hole in and kept the door functioning. Next slide. So again, back to the newspaper searches, we did a lot of that trying to find any objects that we didn't know about. And after looking at the door, I was doing some more newspaper searches, and I found this. In the house owned by the family of the late Reverend Caleb Stetson of Lexington is a bullet hole made at the battle April 19th, 1775. Though nearly 100 years ago, all the clapboards around the hole are in a good state of preservation. So I reached back out to Lexington and asked them if they had anything else. And next slide. And they pulled out a clapboard with a bullet hole in it from the Buckman Tavern. You can see it's coated with layers of lead paint. Next slide. So as the British were coming from Concord and got to East Lexington, just on the east side of Lexington Center, Lord Percy arrived with 1,000 troops, 1,000 reinforcements. And that's where things started to get a lot worse than they had been before. Reverend William Gordon wrote the next day, but a little on this side, Lexington Meeting House, where they were met by the brigade with cannon under Lord Percy, the scene changed. You would have been shocked at the destruction which has been made by the regulars, as they are miscalled, had you been present with me to have beheld it. Many houses were plundered of everything valuable that could be taken away, and what could not be carried off was destroyed. Next slide. And this is the Sergeant William Monroe Tavern. Sergeant Monroe was off fighting that day, and Lord Percy took it as his temporary headquarters. And from about where I'm standing, someone took a shot at one of the windows. Next slide. And hit the taproom ceiling. And you can see how this has been conserved since then. They've taken good care of these structures. This one did supposedly have another bullet strike in it and wainscoting, but there's no more wainscoting left in the house. Next slide. But inside the Monroe Tavern was this portrait of William Monroe, the father of Sergeant William Monroe. And even though he died in 1747, he was still shot on April 19th. Next slide. The bullet struck his arm. You can see the fairly round hole. And thank goodness this wasn't repaired or conserved. Next slide. So another thing that we did for this study was to use all the known published British accounts and provincial accounts, but also some untapped resources and private collections. And this is a great letter written by an unidentified officer of the 4th Regiment of Foot. And he wrote, "From eagerness, you would see a party of soldiers firing at the front of a house and another on its rear, whilst the main body were pelting away at the upper windows, by which means many of our own people fell even after they were in the house, and all the world could not prevent it." So the British soldiers along the main road back to Boston were shooting at all the houses, shooting at the windows, while there were British soldiers in the houses and British soldiers shooting from around the houses. So it was real chaos from East Lexington all the way back to Charlestown and the safety of Boston. Next slide. He also wrote, "In one of those sallies, I had a very narrow escape, having a grenadier of the 5th, a soldier of ours, and a Marine killed all around me. But we soon got into the house, and I counted 11 Yankees dead in it and the orchard. One villain had 73 balls in his bag and 2 horns of powder." I don't know how he had the time to count all that, but he did miss One of the guys that was killed, Lieutenant John Bacon, was killed behind the barn, and he probably couldn't see him. But one of the other people who was killed, one of the 12, was Jason Russell, who owned the house. Next slide. And his house still survives, as I mentioned. It's the home of the Arlington Historical Society, and they've done a pretty good job of conserving the house as well as the bullet holes that survive. Next slide. Here's Dr. Scott with a ballistics rod. There was a bullet that came through the window, it appears, hit this piece of paneling. Next slide. And it's not going all the way up, but it came through the other side and it skipped off the newel post. Next slide. And here's where it gouged the newel post and then probably skipped off out the front door. Next slide. So we weren't going to be able to shoot through paneling, plaster, and hit the newel post, so we just shot through the panel and plaster. This is original early 18th century paneling and 1727 plaster and lath that came out of a house in Connecticut. So we're shooting original materials. So obviously that does make a difference. Next slide. And here's where the ball went in, fairly round. And then next slide. You can see where it came out, and we shot this twice, and both times there was like an egg-shaped hole in the plaster left. Next slide. Upstairs from that shot was a bullet that came through the window. You can click next. And you can see the post-it, the yellow post-it on the window pane. That's consistent with being fired, more than likely, from a soldier in the main body out along the road. Next slide. And on the other side of that paneling was a secret closet, which I tried to get up into, and I was a little bit too fat. So archaeologist Mary Jane Balicki was able to get up inside. Next slide. And she was able to see where the ball came through the paneling. Next slide. And you can see the ball, the hole where it came through, and you can see the wood blowout. Again, this one hit near a knot, so the wood was a lot harder when it blew out. Next slide. And hit it again. And you can see where the ball reached its terminal velocity, hitting the stair riser to the attic. Next slide. And we did lead testing here, and you can see here the pink on the swab. So that tested positive for lead 245 years after that bullet was fired. It hadn't been handled, which is great. We were probably the first ones to ever see it. Next slide. Another shot on the south side of the house came from about where I was standing. Hit the button and hit it again. And you can see where it came through. It went through the outside, came through the paneling. You can see the red laser beam on it. And you hit it again. And there's where it came through the paneling. And again, like some of the others, they filled them with plaster to keep the weather out. And then hit it again. It went across the room, went through the panel on the other side of the room and hit it again. Came out the other side, and it skipped off the ceiling. Next slide. Downstairs in the kitchen, there were provincial soldiers from Beverly, Mass, who were down in the basement of the house when the British were inside the house. So the British took some shots through the door. The door doesn't survive anymore. It was removed in 1895, and nobody knows where it went. But there are still bullet holes that survive. Next slide. One came through the door jamb, and then went to the next slide. Into the stair riser. You can see the ballistics rod in hole 3. Next slide. Then another one had gone through the door and went through the stair riser. Next slide. And here's the exit on the other side of both bullets. You can see, again, the typical wood blowout from the bullets. Now there's carpeting on these stairs now for safety. They tried to put some holes around there so you can see it. So if you do visit the house, you can look at all these bullet holes. Next slide. We also moved a bunch of things in the attic and searched the attic, and we found 2 bullet holes near the north side window. Hit the button. You can see both of these. Again, both of those were near the window, so the British are shooting at the windows of the houses to make sure there's nobody shooting at them or going to shoot at them from the windows. Next slide. One we almost missed is in the stairs going up. It's really dark, typical 18th century house. Hit the arrow. And at first, it looked like it was a peg from the handrail, but it's filled with plaster. Next slide. And you can see where it almost came through the other side. So they pulled the ball out and then filled it with plaster. Next slide. One of the things we wanted to do too was some 3D laser scanning. And Feldman Geospatial, a firm out of Boston, was very kind to do some pro bono work for us. So they spent a day out there scanning. Next slide. Which gave us some really cool cutaways of the house to see the layering, the different levels. Next slide. But it also gave us something we could use for trajectory analysis. So all the white lines you see are all the bullet strikes that remain in this house. Next slide. So there are some people who had said without any documentation that the Jason Russell house had moved. And that is important to our work, obviously, because we're trying to line up all these shots. The trajectories are important. And if the house had moved, that would throw everything off. But we looked at the foundation, we looked at sketches and drawings and images of the house through the 19th century and into the early 20th century. And we could find no evidence of it ever having been moved. And so another company, GSSI Inc., who builds ground penetrating radar units, came out for free and did a scan of the property. Next slide. And there was one mention of the house being moved, but it wasn't moved in its location. And it was 1964. Robert Nylander wrote, a Russell Teal at his death in 1896, the house passed out of the family and a subsequent owner moved it partly off its original foundations to install a furnace. So the house had been picked up, furnace put in, put back down, and then they rebuilt the chimney and fireplace. Can you, yep. And GSSI's analysis revealed no evidence that the Jason Russell house was relocated to its current location. So based upon all the evidence we've looked at, the house was never moved. Next slide. Just to the east of the Jason Russell house along Mass Ave was the Captain William Adams house. And this is a great daguerreotype image of the house prior to 1855. So progress came to this area and the train was coming through. So they decided in 1846 to take part of the back of the house off. And then in July of 1855, they decided to take the whole house down. Next slide.
Oh, no. I don't know if I can go back. There you go.
Okay. All right. There we go. We're getting through it okay. And this was all over the newspapers. This one states, the old house is now undergoing demolition and is daily visited by numbers of persons who are desirous of obtaining some part of it as a memento of the times that tried men's souls. Quite a number of bullets have been found embedded in the walls and timbers, many of which present flattened and ragged surfaces made by penetrating the oak timbers. The owner of the estate, Mr. Josiah Russell, takes pains to secure every bullet found in the building and disposes of them at the rate of $1 each. Yesterday afternoon, a small piece of clapboard, which had been perforated by a bullet, was sold for $50. Next slide. And this is one of the pieces of paneling that was sold. You can click it again. And it's still got the note on the back talking about its removal from the Adams house. Next slide. One of the other things that came out was this front door panel. And you can see it's got a bullet hole in it. You can see the entrance and the exit. And there's a note with it that says front door panel of the Captain William Adams house, Arlington, pierced by a British bullet. Well, the hole is .60, so it's more consistent with being overshot from a provincial fowling piece, not from a British musket. Next slide. And one of the great newspaper articles is this one. They've just pulled down the old building at the corner, which is full of bullets from both sides. They split up the boards and sold the bullets for $1 apiece. On the northwest side, of course, the bullets were those of the advancing Americans. On the south side, the retreating English. So you could buy a Whig or a Tory bullet at your pleasure. And this is a original 19th century glass jar with its original label, with one of those bullets that came out of the house that was sold that day. Next slide. Just to the east of the William Adams house was the home of Ebenezer and Hannah Bradish. Ebenezer was not at his home on the 19th, but his wife Hannah was, who had just had a baby 8 days before. Click next, please. And she made a deposition as to what happened. And she wrote, she being weak and unable to go out of her house, in order to secure herself and family, they all retired into the kitchen in the back part of the house. She soon found the house surrounded with the king's troops, that upon observation made, at least 70 bullets were shot into the front part of the house. Several bullets were lodged in the kitchen where she was, and one passed through an easy chair she had just gone from. The door of the front part of the house was broke open. She did not see any soldiers in the house, but supposed by the noise they were in the front part. Next slide. So in the collection of the Arlington Historical Society, I found this shutter and looked at it with the curator, and it's got a bullet hole you can see on the left, and then the exit hole on the right. Next slide. And there was a note attached to it, shutters taken from the Amos Whittemore house. So Amos Whittemore lived in his home around 1800, but doing a search of the records, we found out that the shutter actually came from the Ebenezer and Hannah Bradish house. Next slide. And we also found this shutter in their collection, bifold. You can see the bullet going in on the left and then coming out on the right. And you can see on the image on the right where had been some plaster in the hole at some point. And then you can click slowly 3 times. While we looked at it, we ended up finding 3 more bullet holes in that bifold shutter that had all been filled with plaster. Next slide. And of course, we wanted to shoot a shutter. So we ended up shooting the shutter 5 times. This was actually an early 20th century reproduction shutter that had been on one of the buildings at the Concord Museum, but when they renovated, it was going to be thrown away, and the curator saved it, and he couldn't throw it away, and so he donated it to us to shoot. You there?
Oh, yep.
Got a little freeze up there?
Yeah, I guess so. We were so close.
Yeah, I know. We're almost done. We're almost done. Come on.
All right. Do you need me to hit next?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can hit next again.
Apparently not.
Yeah, I don't know why it's so temperamental today. Oh, okay, there we go. So there's the holes going in from the front of the shutter, and then click again, and the 2 holes going out with a typical wood blowout. Next slide. All right. So this project, we obviously this isn't a hit and run project. We're still working on it. We're still doing live fire studies. We've got a big one coming up, hopefully in the fall. We're doing a lot more archaeology. We did some at Minuteman National Park over the past few years, and we just did a project at Bunker Hill where we found some great objects in the ground that help tell the story. But we've also been looking out for other bullet struck objects. And after our book was printed, we found another one that we didn't know anything about before. So you remember the newspaper article from the Captain William Adams house. The owner of the estate, Mr. Josiah Russell, takes pains to secure every bullet found in the building and disposes of them at the rate of $1 each. Yesterday afternoon, a small piece of clapboard, which had been perforated by a bullet, was sold for $50. So Christmas, just before Christmas a year and a half ago, having a cocktail on the couch, and my phone started to blow up about a curious object that appeared at auction. Next slide. And it's the piece of clapboard from the Captain William Adams house. You can see it's got a typed or printed label on it, taken down in July 1855, which we know was taken down and appeared in the papers on July 12th. Next slide. And it had been owned by Jared Sparks. He was a famous minister, historian, and former president of Harvard College. So he was the one who bought this in 1855. Next slide. And boxed it in with glass so you could see both sides. Next slide. And it came up for auction with an estimate of $1,000 to $2,000. And when the auction started a couple weeks later, it had quickly bumped up to $4,750. Next slide. and then it hammered at 25,000 plus $5,000 buyer's premium. So it sold for $30,000 total for a 4-inch by 2-inch piece of the Captain William Adams house. Next slide. Anyway, all of this and a lot more is in our book, Bullet Strikes on the First Day of the American Revolution. We do have one celebrity who has enjoyed our book. Click, please. And that's Kurt Russell. He is the eighth great grandson of Jason Russell, who was killed in his own home on April 19th. And since he was the eighth great grandson, I think he purchased 8 copies of the book to give to his family members, which was kind of cool. Anyway, next slide. Thank you for bearing with us with our technical difficulties. Hopefully, it didn't go too bad, and you got some information and understanding on the heavy fighting that happened on April 19th.
All right. Yeah, we got through it. That was a lot of clicking.
Yeah, it is. You got to work out for your finger there,
I
Ashley.
had to actually pay attention, Joel.
Yeah, I know. I know. You never pay attention to my talks.
All right. I see that we have one question so far in the Q&A. As a reminder, if you want to ask any questions, down at the bottom it says Q&A. You can type that in, and we will answer your questions to the best of our ability. But the first question was, why would they shorten the barrel length?
So I'm assuming the person's talking about the provincial fowling pieces, with the barrels that are sometimes 55 and 60 inches long. They're really unwieldy when you're hunting. And obviously, shotguns in the 19th century were developed from these fowling pieces, but they realized with the quality of the powder that they were using at the time that they didn't need that barrel length to push the bullet out or the shot out. So they shortened the barrels up. So in the 19th century, sometimes they would update a flintlock by converting it to percussion, and they would also shorten the barrel so that they could take it out and hunt without it whacking on tree branches and other things, because it is a really long gun.
How did you remove the plaster without damaging the wood and or the bullet?
So we didn't remove any plaster. Whoever had done it, it had already been done. And we didn't remove any bullets from anything. So the one bullet that we showed at the beginning from the Merritt Monroe house, that had been pulled out when construction was being done in 1915. So we didn't take anything out, and we didn't remove any plaster from anything. We weren't going to damage any artifacts for study.
Do you, since we don't have any questions right now, I have a question of, we got one, but I'm gonna ask my question and then I'll ask that. Do you find that you encounter any skepticism with the fact that you're firing, reproductions? I know you're using like the same materials from the time frame, but since you're using modern techniques on historic kind of pieces of history, do you get any skepticism about the accuracy of what it is that you're doing? That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense, and I get that. So we're not obviously going to shoot original guns. This isn't Pawn Stars where they make
Yeah.
Chumley go out and shoot a $50,000 musket, which is unnecessary. The other thing is that 18th century arms, the barrels were made from flat stock, and the barrel was welded. The iron was welded around a mandrel, so you could have black powder corrosion in there, and you don't want to shoot an original gun. So we have 16 custom built guns that we use for our studies. And basically, you're doing the same things. You're firing out of a tube. So what we're trying to do is emulate as much as possible, to the best of our ability, how those shots would have happened, and we're actually able to get some of the same markings that you see on the musket balls that we find archaeologically on the balls that we're shooting too. So I think, other than the fact that we're shooting with newer made guns, and these aren't off the shelf guns. Some of these guns took 2, 3, 4 years to be built. So we're really trying our hardest to get it as right as possible to the best of our ability.
So it's not like a Pedersoli,
Yeah, no,
which are
no,
actually
no,
beautifully made.
no. They're cool guns, and they're great. They're safe. They're great to shoot. But we wanted guns that, there's really only 2 reproduction guns that you can get, which are Pedersoli or the old Navy Arms stuff, the pattern 1763 musket or a Shortland. But we wanted more than that. So we have fowling pieces with 48, 55, and 60-inch barrels. We have just about every different type of British musket, pistols, and all that other stuff that we've had made specifically for ballistics study.
All right. So, next question. Did they ever keep the windage down with an understanding that the bore would need to be cleaned more often?
Well, they they kept they knew that the bore had to be clean. Obviously, a lot of these people were good shooters. They had been shooting for a long time. Some of them had not. Unlike what people say, not everybody had a gun during that time period, even though by law you were supposed to. So towns would loan guns to people. But some of those guys, wouldn't have really known that much other than the fact that, you can foul the gun and a ball get jammed in it. So they really were, I think, um, looking at the windage and realizing how important it was to downsize that ball so it didn't jam up in the gun. Especially, I mean, hunting is a little bit different, but especially in combat.
All right. Our next question might be more of a me question, but I'll ask it to you because it talks about Bruin, and I'm not sure how familiar with Bruin, the Bruin decision you are. But how might your research apply to the Bruin case law analysis? And to give you a little, if you're not super aware of it, so basically, Bruin created a kind of hierarchical look at different historical moments that are considered the most relevant when determining the constitutionality of a modern law, with the founding era, so around the ratification of the Second Amendment, being the most important. So what and I'm oversimplifying it, but basically what the courts are looking at are kind of are there any laws that are considered analogous to a modern law? It doesn't have to be a copy of a modern law, but analogous to a modern law in order to determine that constitutionality. And so when we look at these kinds of things, this ended up being a lot more detailed of a description I thought. But when we look at these things, we look at like the technologies that were around and whether there were laws to regulate it. So I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts about the work that you're doing and how it might actually apply
Yeah,
in the court system.
yeah, I think that's a totally you question because we're
uh,
stuck in the 18th century. I try to keep my head out of modern stuff as much as possible.
Me too. So what's this is kind of an interesting this is an interesting level of research that you see a lot kind of in my world. And what I love about it is because Joel's completely kind of divorced from that kind of modern dialogue about the laws and how the laws are impacted and evolve over time. So you get research for research's sake with the kind of work that Joel is doing because he's trying to kind of recreate and determine how things were back then without any kind of conversation about how that impacts today. So I love when you get, research like Joel's because it's not coming with any like potential outside bias or I hate to say agenda, but a lot of times when we're researching as a historian, when you're researching larger contextual conversations, and you'll see that with a lot of the experts in these cases, we're coming at it trying to analyze it within the present context as well. Joel's not doing that, and so this is one of those pieces of research that serves a foundation for the experts, the courts, to look at this and be able to kind of draw those larger conclusions. In terms of a lot of the conversations that are happening today, especially around feature-based firearms laws, I would say some of the stuff that Joel's working on doesn't come up as much in the conversation because we're talking more about, the repeating firearms that existed or specific features of the firearms. Or, I mean, we do talk about the efficacy and the accuracy of the firearms, but it doesn't necessarily have a direct translation, although there was in one of your presentations, it wasn't this one, but a previous one where you talked about how they would load double rounds sometimes.
Yeah, yeah,
So can you describe that
yeah,
real quick?
yeah. So sometimes in 18th century documents, you'll see a guy talking about how he loaded with two balls in his gun, and he thought at the time that was going to be better. I mean, there was a John Monroe on Lexington Green, and he talks about he loaded two balls into his gun, and he took a shot, and it blew the top foot of the barrel off. Um, what happens with the two ball load is you lose a lot of the velocity. So the first ball comes out, and say it comes out at almost 700 feet per second. And then the second ball comes out at 270. And so the first ball could be lethal, but the second ball wouldn't be. But they didn't know these types of things at the time. But back to your comment, I try to avoid reading stuff. And there was one thing which I can't remember the name of it, and that's probably a good thing that I don't mention it here. But there was a writer, a modern writer, who wrote a whole paper about firearms during the Revolution, and he used his own biases to make statements that were not true. And so we try to stay completely out of that. And we just want to give facts and documentary evidence because a lot of people are tainted with guns specifically. And you get some really bad stuff that's written, and one side takes it and runs with it. And it's not right.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when I have we had a conference last year, and I've got a few more questions, so I'm not going to go on much longer. But where we combined legal scholars and different historians. Joel was there. We had the curator of Colonial Williamsburg and Springfield Armory, and it's so interesting to kind of see the way that research is approached, and then kind of the nuance of what you guys know because of how in the weeds you're getting, and how that then gets synthesized by scholars who are looking at something more holistically, and how they don't always know all of the work that you guys are doing. So it's kind of this, I don't know, it's really interesting. I don't want to go too long because I want people to actually get their other questions answered. But the reason I brought up that kind of double load in terms of what I do, looking at things like repeating functions or being able to fire multiple shots with one trigger pull, that's an example of something that somebody might not be aware of. And when you're looking at, was everything just one shot, that can add to the list of other repeaters and superposed guns and other firearms that were around prior to the founding and the founding. So something like that would be an interesting piece of evidence if you're discussing repeating, not necessarily repeating, but multi-shot technology at the time of the founding. Okay, I will stop. Next question. Has anyone used a metal detector in the homes to find additional bullets in the original house structure?
Yeah, so we did go through a little bit with pinpointers, and we did have some machines with us. But the problem is you have nails, you have wiring, you have all sorts of things in the houses now. So the machine goes off all the time. So it's even with discrimination set, it's going off all the time. So you're picking up a lot of the other house related material and not bullets. And the other thing too is if we did find some, we're not going to be digging anything out of the house. So we stuck with what we can study without doing any damage to anything. Because frankly, we're doing so much archaeology work. We're looking at bullets. I've looked at every known bullet from the first day of the American Revolution that survives in museum collections or in some private collections. So I've been looking, I got to study hundreds of balls fired on the first day of the Revolution and recently at Bunker Hill. So I don't really need to go in and try and dig something out of a house. And I just don't want to, we don't want to damage anything.
All right. And then we've got two more questions. So if we go a few minutes over, are you okay with that, Joel?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's just hopefully you can't. The people showed up to mow the lawn right now, so they're
Oh, look,
mowing and the
look.
dogs are barking. So
I
it's
cannot hear it, so you're good.
perfect
I've been
timing.
keeping my
Okay.
fingers crossed that wouldn't happen this whole call since I couldn't be on mute. All right. So the question is, as someone starting in firearm research from a more material lens, would studying bullet holes help with understanding how one side won over the other, especially considering how the American Revolution worked out so differently from what was expected?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think in a way you have to tie it all together. It's the bullet holes help tell us of the ferocity of the fighting. They help tell us who might have been firing the shots. But you have to, in my mind, you have to tie that all together with the documentary evidence also, and the original objects that survive. So it's kind of hard to say. We can't tell. I mean, obviously, we know what happened on April 19th. So, I don't know. That's kind of a hard one. Kind of
What
hard one.
what kind of pops into my brain with that question is the work that Doug did at Custer's battlefield. I mean, that
Yeah,
one's probably the best example of at least tracking, being able to use kind of the archaeology to
yeah,
track the
and that's
movement.
completely different because and actually Doug is at Cody Firearms Museum right now, doing firing pin impressions with Tyler and the crew, and Danny. So, but yeah, Doug's work with firing pin impressions and bullets is in conical bullets is different than this. So with those, you can look at the rifling marks, the tool marks on the shell casings, and he can track Native Americans and troopers all over the battlefield, and that's really crazy. That technology that you can sit down and look that closely at the firing pin impression and see what happened in a battle. With smoothbore guns, it's a lot harder to do because we don't have the shell casings, and there's really no fingerprint that can tie it to a gun. Whereas with the little bighorn stuff, there is.
Yeah, we'll have to have Doug come and do a talk
You
too.
should. You
Yeah.
should. He's
Um,
awesome.
and then the last question is, are there any other Revolutionary War sites slash battles where similar work is being done? If so, how are their findings comparing to yours?
So I think right now, I think we're the only ones that are crazy enough to do all this stuff. And but like I said, this isn't a hit and run thing. We started doing that. We started working on this stuff in 2013, and we continue, or we're going to continue to do it till we croak. So I'd like to do other Rev War sites. We're not really into doing the Civil War sites. I mean, there's so much of that stuff. We know so much more about the Civil War, but the American Revolution is so much harder. There's not a lot out there. So anytime we can look at something that was bullet struck or find the bullets in the ground, we can get new information that we didn't know before. And back to that other question, I just thought of something. We did a archaeological dig at a place that used to be called Bloody Angle at the park. It's called Elmbrook Hill now, but we did a survey in 2024, and right when we finished, we got into the start of a heavy firefight, which in the end of May, we went back and we found more. And there are things we didn't know before that we see where this heavy firefight, based upon the deformation of the musket balls we found in this one area, there was a real sharp firefight here that nobody, we never knew about that before. So there are things that we can tell from those balls, but we can't narrow it down as much as like Doug can. So
All right. I think that are all that I can't talk.
uh,
Those are our questions. Thank you so much, Joel. I did want to let everyone know that if you're interested in buying his book, if you go to firearmsresearchcenter.org and you go to our news and events tab, we do have a link to it. So it'll take you straight to the Amazon page. So you can order it if you want.
And if you're near Cody Firearms Museum or Buffalo Bill Center of the West, it's there. And it's at a lot of the local historical societies around Lexington and Concord too.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And we will see you all next month. Thanks,
Thanks,
Joel.
Ashley.
Bye.